Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Anderson, and I'm the Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs here at Columbia, and it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you to this, the 12th Annual David N. Dinkins Forum in Leadership and Urban Policy. The forum this year is devoted to discussions of wealth and poverty in global cities. It's, like many of our other forums, been devoted to thinking about the relationship between New York and other cities, about best practices, and about ways to think about change in urban environments. We'll be talking about poverty today, efforts to understand and alleviate poverty in both New York and in other large urban centers around the world. We've brung together panelists who are experts in housing, health, and employment both here in New York and in major cities overseas, once again showcasing SIPA's breadth and depth in our networks of policy analysts and advocates as we reflect on the place of New York City in an ongoing dialogue on critical public policy issues. From the first forum in 1995, when Vice President Al Gore kicked off the series with a discussion of the Urban Empowerment Zone program, to our periodic reflections on the urban agenda in U.S. national elections, and our examinations of the roles of labor, environment issues, culture and tourism, and immigration in urban development, we've devoted this forum over the course of the last 12 years to the examination of the challenges and opportunities that confront the world's great human agglomerations, particularly our very own New York City. Animating these discussions year after year is our very own mayor, or to us, Professor David N. Dinkins. David Dinkins is a professor of practice here at the School of International and Public Affairs, where he also serves on our board of advisors. The university recently established the David N. Dinkins Professorship in the Practice of Urban and Public Affairs in his honor, and we have launched the Dinkins Archives and Oral History Project. One of the most recognizable faces in the world, you should try and walk down the street with David Dinkins sometime. He served as the 106th mayor of New York City. He began his career in public service in 1966 in the New York State Assembly. He was subsequently elected to the Borough of Manhattan presidency in 1985 and obviously as mayor of the city of New York in November 1989, serving a 4-year term. During that term, he instituted the Safe Streets, Safe City, Cops and Kids program, the model criminal justice program for reducing crime and expanding opportunities for the children of New York City, and he established the Beacon schools. He is fond of referring to New York as a gorgeous mosaic, and he continues to be a vocal advocate for children, education, compassionate urban policy, and tolerance. He chairs the New York City-Johannesburg Sister City program, serves on the advisory board of Independent News and Media, and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He serves also on the steering committee of the Association for a Better New York, ABNY, and is a member of the board of directors of the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. All through this, I should point out, he maintains a full teaching schedule. He serves on the board of several not-profit and charitable organizations, many of which assist children and young people. As this is my last Dinkins Forum as dean after 10 years, I want to take this opportunity to say that it has been an enormous pleasure and privilege to work with David during my tenure. He is as compassionate and tolerant a colleague as he is an advocate, and far more patient than most of our colleagues. David has been a generous and valued advisor to me, as to everyone else at Columbia, and we are much better for it. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to work with him and welcome him to open the forum. Thanks, sir.
First, for those of you who are observant, you might say, well, wonder how come he didn't kiss Lisa. It's because I have a cold and I'm trying to not spread it around too much. But otherwise, I would embrace her warmly. She's a good friend, and I'm just delighted that she again has helped us. So thank you, Dean Anderson, and thank all of you for joining us today for the 12th Annual David Dinkins Leadership and Public Policy Forum. We're all anxious to hear from our keynote speaker, Mr. David Jones, and to exchange ideas with our excellent panels, so I'll keep my remarks more brief than they would otherwise have been. As always, I'm indebted to Lisa Anderson for helping to conceptualize the topics of these annual forums and for hosting our gathering again this year. At the end of this academic year, as you've just been told, Dean Anderson has chosen to return to teaching, writing, speaking, and other activities she's had to burn the midnight oil to accomplish the last decade. Fortunately, she will remain on faculty here at Columbia as Professor of International Affairs and Political Science, and she will continue to lend her considerable knowledge and expertise to the university's programs, including the Dinkins Forum. Under her leadership, SIPA has married public policy with global concerns in ways that other institutions have not succeeded in doing, always with the aim of grooming global leaders who have a practical as well as a theoretical grounding in their chosen fields. Our faculty has doubled in size on her watch, and she has been instrumental in creating the majority of the innovative degree programs from which our graduates now span the globe into 155 countries at last count. The decade of her deanship has been an especially volatile period in world affairs and in the academy, and has demanded exceptionally strong leadership. We at SIPA have been fortunate to enjoy the stewardship of one such person in Dean Lisa Anderson, and we are indeed grateful. So thank you, Lisa, for 10 excellent years of service to this school and to this university. As you know, the topic of this, our 12th forum, centers on the disparities between wealth and poverty in our global cities. And we have assembled quite a distinguished group to help us to address the issues. The chairs of our panels today are Dr. Esther Fuchs, Professor of International and Public Affairs and Political Science, and Dr. Elliot Sklar, Professor of Urban Planning and Public Affairs, and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at the university's Earth Institute. I'm most grateful to them for identifying the key issues and for urging the participation of the 7 panelists for whom these issues are high priorities. Dr. Fuchs, one of SIPA's most prolific scholars and practitioners, returned to SIPA last fall from a 4-year leave to serve as Mayor Bloomberg's special advisor on governance and strategic planning, and we're happy to welcome her home. It was Dr. Fuchs who gave life to this forum 12 years ago, and she has consistently played a major role in bringing the most compelling public policy issues to the floor for an airing. Dr. Fuchs delivered the prestigious Tannenbaum Lecture last week entitled Changing Policy and Surviving Politics Inside New York's City Hall. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for that. I thought as I looked at these words, it must have been pretty interesting. I mean, did you tell any secrets, or you just... I see. Dr. Sklar, as many of you faculty and students know, is our reigning expert on sustainable urban development and co-chaired the UN Millennium Project's task on improving the lives of slum dwellers. In July, Dr. Sklar will co-host a major month-long urban summit with the Rockefeller Foundation on today's topic in Bellagio, Italy, and has much to share with us about the challenges that the global economy brings to the policymakers in the world's urban centers and to the daily lives of the people who live there. In this country, despite the neglect of the Bush White House and the complicity of a failed congressional leadership, the current New York City administration has chosen to address the disparity between the rich and the poor New Yorkers. Last year, Mayor Bloomberg impaneled a 32-member commission composed of leaders in the city's business, civic, academic, nonprofit, and advocacy communities to recommend a plan of action to reduce poverty and close the gap between the haves and have-nots. The report of the Commission for Economic Opportunity, entitled Increasing Opportunity and Reducing Poverty in New York City, was issued last fall and contains recommendations for devising cross-sector public-private solutions. Dr. Fuchs will chair our first panel on creating economic opportunity for low-income New Yorkers and has assembled several of her fellow members of the Mayoral Commission for Economic Opportunity to discuss the recommendations and strategies of the Commission's report. Their Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation President Calvin Granum, Safe Space President Lilian Barros Paoli, and SEEDCO President Diane Bayerjohn, and Deputy Mayor Linda Gibbs. I haven't seen Linda yet, but I'm sure she's coming. You will recognize her when she enters. She has had one of the most difficult jobs in government before becoming a deputy mayor. Her job was dealing with the homeless. She still has that as part of her portfolio, and as many of you here doubtless know, it's got to be one of the most difficult jobs in government, if you care. If you don't care, it's light stuff. But if you care, it is really tough, and she cares. The paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty is, of course, a global phenomenon and increasingly an urban crisis. As Dr. Sklar noted in announcing the Bellagio Summit, this year marks the first time in history that half of the world's population lives in urban regions. He will chair Panel 2, Poverty Solutions in Global Cities, and will call upon his colleagues, University of Rome Professor Pietro Gario, who I might add is a tennis player. Where is he? He's a tennis player, and he promised to take it easy on me when I explained to him that it is said that if my skill were to approach my enthusiasm, I might be half a player. And he said, well, that being the case, he would take it easy on me. Lisbon University Professor Jose Lucio and Columbia University Professor Smithia Cernivas to share their analysis and direction on this topic, and we thank them for giving of their time to broaden our perspective. Following each panel presentation, we would be interested in some discussion with the problem with those of you who have been observers and participants in local and global efforts to address these issues. And we are especially interested in hearing the thoughts, opinions, and questions of those students in the audience, because we recognize that you truly are our future. It is you who really make a difference. Our panel chairs will reintroduce their prospective panelists as each session begins. But first, I have the honor of presenting our keynote speaker to set the tone for our discussions. He is a longtime friend, someone only his father excelled and exceeded his great ability, in my opinion. His father, Tom Jones, was a remarkable, remarkable man who has gone to his reward, and we will miss him. But he leaves us his son, who is, as you will hear shortly, an amazing young man. David Jones is he's young. Next to me, everybody's young. No, come on. I'm an elderly feller here. As a matter of fact, I want you all to know that today is our son's, you note I say our son, not my son. My wife taught me that. Today is our son's 53rd birthday. Your daddy, thank you, I'll tell him. Daddy's little fella, I call him. David Jones is president and CEO of one of the nation's oldest and largest organizations in service to community, the Community Service Society of New York. Mr. Jones brings us to today's discussion a wealth of insight and experience with managing a cadre of scholars in critiquing and informing public policies and advocating solutions and programs to address the needs of the people of the city of New York. For over 160 years, the Community Service Society has applied itself to the formidable task of alleviating the effects of poverty. Since its founding in 1848, CSS has become the central coordinating agency and fiscal conduit for many of the most progressive programs of community assistance in the metropolitan area. With a staff of over 100 professionals, CSS designs and implements innovative projects to improve the lives of the poor in our city, and interfaces with service organizations throughout the nation in the critical areas of education, healthcare, employment and joblessness, and housing and homelessness. It's difficult to comprehend the scope of the undertaking of the Community Service Society. In the areas of healthcare, its Medicaid Managed Care Education Project has trained over 15,000 beneficiaries on the choice and use of managed care plans and is being replicated in cities throughout the nation. When CSS turned its attention to the problem of affordable housing, it took on the task of rehabilitating an entire neighborhood in Bedford-Stuyvesant through its Gates Avenue project. As part of its mission, CSS channels civic-minded New Yorkers into volunteer activities and trains them to maximize their individual effectiveness. Its Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, RSVP, is the nation's oldest and largest, enlisting the help of some 10,000 volunteers who contribute more than 2.5 million hours each year to 600 or more New York City hospitals, nursing homes, schools, homeless shelters, and libraries. In addition to its direct delivery of service, CSS conducts ongoing research, advocacy, and litigation. Its publications serve as a definitive resources for anyone seeking accurate, up-to-date data and analyses of social issues. Its annual opinion survey of low-income New Yorkers, called The Unheard Third, subtitled Bringing the Voices of Low-Income New Yorkers to the Public Policy Debate, has become must-reading for policymakers. I might add that another important annual report, The State of Black America, issued by the National Urban League, is being released as we speak, following a press conference that takes place at the National Press Club. I understand from Urban League President Mark Morial that this year's report focuses on the plight of black men in the United States and provides a statistical measurement of equality gaps that exist between African Americans and mainstream America. David Jones has presided over the activities of the Community Service Society since 1986 and has celebrated his 20th year as its leader. If the organization had not preceded his presidency by some 138 years, one would think that the job was created just for him. To begin with, David is a native New Yorker, born in Bed-Stuy, and knows this city and its people well. A graduate of Wesleyan University and Yale Law School, David interned for Senator Robert Kennedy and clerked for Judge Constance Baker Motley before joining a law firm where he specialized in corporate antitrust cases. He was special advisor to Mayor Ed Koch, then executive director of the New York City Youth Bureau, before becoming the youngest and first black director of CSS. David, who also served on the Merrill Commission for Economic Opportunity, was the recipient of the 2003 SIPA Global Leadership Award, served on the panel on sustainable communities at the 8th Annual Dinkins Forum, chaired the panel on the immigrant population in the 21st century global cities at our last forum, and we're delighted to welcome him back to speak with us again today. My friend, David Jones.
You started it off.
And I gave him a short introduction.
Oh, God almighty. It is an honor to be here. I literally have known David Dinkins perhaps all of my adult life. And so when he called to ask me to give these remarks, it was a pleasure. I also have to reveal that the mayor is a life trustee of Community Service Society, so it's not like an arm's length deal here. So I responded. As the mayor has mentioned already, he took the opening remarks I had. The organization I lead, CSS, is 160 years old. I've been there nearing 21 years, actually. And we have gone through a number of different changes over the years. Over the last year particularly, we've engaged and embarked on a bit of soul-searching that has led us to conclude that our greatest contribution for this coming decade is to work with the city on advancing an agenda centered on moving the working poor to good wages and benefits in their jobs. Through much of our research, provision of program and direct service, we understand more completely how economic mobility is the key to transforming the lives of the poor and giving them an opportunity to be full civic participants in the nation's largest city. The Dinkins Forum spotlights subjects crucial and critical to New York City, but this year's event gives us the opportunity to look at our city in a global context. As a lifelong New Yorker, actually a lifelong Brooklynite, which is different. We never really considered it was going into the city if you were from Brooklyn, for those of you from Brooklyn. You do get a sort of tunnel vision. There's a sense of parochialism, that there really isn't anything beyond the river. But it's now clear, and I think all of those in this room recognize that it's not just trade that crosses global boundaries, but the consequences of economic inequities do too. And that's why this kind of discussion is so vital. So that while I'm most interested in the issues of the welfare of poor New Yorkers, we can't turn a blind eye to the world's poor or think that their conditions aren't directly impacting the condition of poor people in the city of New York. The city is at a historic crossroads, we believe. While certain segments of the city are experiencing the best of times, too many New Yorkers are mired in poverty with no hope or reasonable expectation that their condition, and worse yet, their children's condition, will change in the foreseeable future. The disparity between the affluent and the poor has widened, seen most vividly in joblessness among young people, Black and Latino, inadequate health care, and a housing market that has priced out the working poor and is now impacting the middle class. A recent study by Brookings revealed that New York City has now the smallest proportion of middle-income families of any metropolitan area in the country, and the number of our middle-class neighborhoods is shrinking by the day. Considering the growth in income disparities, it is possible that New York City will never again see a vibrant middle class. Once middle-class residents are forced out of the city, we seem to be creating conditions in our state and city which will prevent poor New Yorkers from ever moving up. That's a central tenet of the American experiment: mobility from the bottom rungs to the middle class. And it's fast becoming a mirage for many poor New Yorkers. Our own research at the Community Service Society has revealed the extent to which we're not even coming close to preparing our workforce for middle-class jobs and incomes. The extent of black male joblessness, with numbers approaching and exceeding 40% of working-age black males, have shocked even those of us who have been aware of the problem for a long time. And as with so many of the issues we confront, this is a problem of national and global dimensions. In 2005, a little outdated, 42% of working-age black men were jobless in Chicago, 48% in Pittsburgh, 42% in both Detroit and Cleveland. This is part of a national context and a national problem. But look at France. Many of you watched the riots that took place in the immigrant communities of France, mainly among young immigrant men who couldn't get jobs and couldn't work and rioted, not because they're fun of it, but because they're confronting just this kind of problem of being ill-educated and discriminated against in their urban center. We have also identified a vast number of young people in our city who are disconnected from opportunity. Almost 170,000 young men and women, 16 to 24 years of age, virtually all Black and Latino, who are neither employed nor in school. In many places in the country, that size population is a small city. Again, while this is a national issue, it reverberates around the globe. The National League of Cities, for instance, estimated that there were 5.7 million disconnected young people nationally a few years ago. In Chicago, the number was put at 97,000. In Los Angeles, 88,000. A substantial majority, 71% of disconnected youth in America's 10 largest cities were either black or Latino. Go to many cities abroad, and I've visited and lived in some of them, London, Johannesburg, Paris, and I will guarantee that you will find young people who are virtually invisible, totally severed from the economic mainstream, just like those in New York, Chicago, and LA. Nearly 3.5 million New Yorkers are now living in or near poverty, over 40% of the city's population. And once again, I'm afraid to say, New York is not alone. High rates of poverty are the rule rather than the exception in many urban areas. When we discuss poverty in New York City, we're talking about communities of color. Overwhelming poverty is a condition that devastates black and Latino urban neighborhoods. The city's own numbers tell that story. In East Harlem, nearly 30% of residents live at or below the federal poverty line, of about 18,000 for a family of 3. In Central Harlem, 1 in 4 in poverty. Urban poverty is systemic. In my view, it has no or little or no relationship to individual responsibility. I take this view, it's somewhat different. We've been sold quite a bill of goods of late. That this is all our moral failings, black and Latino young. This is hip-hop. Well, I'll tell you, this is systemic and has very little to do with the individuals caught in it. We, as a nation, I believe, are in the process of creating what we said we'd never do, a permanent caste system. And we're on the verge of it. We're going to fall into it by little steps if we don't do something dramatic about it. Fixing it now, after all these years of letting it go, will require an investment on the same scale as the problem. It will require enormous amounts of time and effort and money. The issues surrounding urban poverty are complex, and I think many of you know this better than I. In New York City, we have an education system that has utterly failed, an economy that produces either very high-wage jobs or very low-wage jobs, a labor movement that, up until very recently, has been in full-blown retreat, and in a generation of young people who are entering adulthood without a future because of a gross lack of basic education and marketable skills. In our society, joblessness and poverty can almost always be traced to substandard education. A life in poverty begins early, with an inadequate education often leading to dropping out of school that seems to have no connection to the world of work. The city's own numbers show that it's just over half of the students entering our public school system fail to graduate. Of those who do graduate, less than 10% of black and Latino students leave with a Regents diploma, the bare minimum for really participating actively in this economy. Most high school dropouts don't get past the 9th or 10th grade. By the time they reach high school, it's often too late to improve their chances for success in the classroom and beyond without significant and long-term remediation. Most leave school without the skills necessary for employment. Clearly, the things that start to emerge already, we're going to need in this city a second chance policy specifically to reach out to young men and women who have dropped out or in danger of dropping out. For those with deep educational deficits, this will not be a cheap, quick fix. Short-term, superficial, and minimally funded training programs do not make up for 12 years of educational malfeasance. It will require a more nuanced and focused approach, where training and education will have to be supplemented by a wage, so people can learn and live at the same time. Without a wage supplement, dropping out becomes endemic, as evidenced, in my view, by the huge dropout rates that we haven't talked about much in the community college system, which now, the last time I heard it, was dropping below, that we have only 20% graduation rate for this population. And when you start to talk to people about why they're dropping out, part of it is lack of preparation they get from the public school system. But a large part of this is something we keep finding. There's no money in the households anymore. They can't stay around without work. They have to take full-time work even to hope to maintain where they're living and eating and getting health care. So we put these young people in an impossible bind and blame them for their lack of initiative or their hip-hop operations. I am angry about this stuff. Talk about reversing and blaming the victim here. When you visit any of the schools in the city of New York and you meet these young people, there's nothing intellectually wrong. There is literally almost a conscious withdrawal of resources that were necessary to give them a shot at making a living and succeeding. We at the Community Service Society believe that the route to escaping poverty is through work. We picked up a line from the conservatives. We do too. But it has been amply demonstrated that holding a job will not necessarily pull a working family out of poverty. There are a number of reasons why low-wage workers find they can't escape poverty, including the lack of health benefits, the rise in housing costs, and the decline of union membership. CSS conducts an annual survey of low-income New Yorkers. Our latest findings reveal the dismal status of the city's low-wage workers. Only 45% get any kind of health benefits on the job. Only 35% have any kind of drug coverage. Just 37% have a retirement plan. Less than half get any kind of paid sick leave at all. Moreover, when you ask them how they're doing, the vast majority report that they're confronted with more than 3 sort of income and life-threatening problems. They're on the verge of eviction. They've had to skip getting health care that they needed, or they can't feed their family adequately. This is in the richest city in the nation. It's an indictment, if anything. We did a report, one of the first for us, of the New York City's security guards to give you some idea of what's being faced by low-wage workers. We did it in conjunction with SEIU, Local 32BJ, who asked us to commission it, who commissioned it. The city now has 63,000 security guards. They earn somewhere in the vicinity of $10 an hour. From what we can gather, none of them have health insurance at all, nor do most, if not all, have a day off for sick time. They are totally bereft. They are non-unionized. Less than 5% are unionized. Overwhelmingly, 8 in 10 are men of color, most black men. When we did focus groups with these guys, we started to get just how tense this became. You listen to one security guard talk about the fact that his big splurge is to go to the movies once a month. They talk about not being offered health insurance by their employer and recognizing they can't stay in their rental housing if they took health insurance because the costs of the copay are just too high. One of them said, I got sick and went to the hospital and they charged me $1,000, so I've got to go to work to pay that off. I intend to do it over time. It'll take at least a year for me to do it. So you find a whole population working extraordinarily hard who are literally on the edge. And when we look at numbers from the increase in homelessness to the kinds of stories you see flashing out every so often in the news, you start to get an idea of what it's like to be among the working poor in the city of New York. This is some of the realities, not all, and I'm sure many in this room know many other cases of what it's like to be among the working poor now. What we learned from our security guard research is that unions continue to play an important role in obtaining livable wage and benefits and raising workplace standards. The absence of unions leaves low-wage workers totally devoid of protection. And it's interesting how effective the right wing has been here. I've read so many reports that unionism is slowly going out. It's really no longer appropriate in a global society, that it has no role. Well, I don't know how my security guard, earning $10 an hour, with no leverage and basically terminated if they act up, is supposed to cope with large bureaucracies and large employers other than unionization. There's no way. I can barely get up in the morning after working two shifts and taking care of family and getting everyone fed. Now I'm supposed to take on a big boss to make sure I get the wages I deserve, the health insurance I deserve, and then go back to school so I can get a higher skilled and higher paid job. It ain't going to happen without unions. And I think as social progressives, we have to recognize that we have to turn this discussion around. I was having a discussion, actually, about this. I was out in Princeton talking to Mead, this guy who was one of the architects of welfare reform. And in the middle of it, I turned to him and I said, "You won. It's finished. Welfare reform is done. We should all celebrate that you won this victory. Now what are we going to do for the working poor?" And I said, it better be unions, because I can't think of anything else that can put them on even an approximate equal playing field. And he said, "You know, I think you may be right." I wish I had taped it, because maybe I could use it somewhere, but he did. But we're also talking about things that we have to do in addition to unionization, about something we're going to have to deal with as a national priority. And literally, you know, I can tell we've been so beaten down that whenever I talk to my compatriots in the not-for-profit sector and I talk about significant government investment for young people in high school or for disconnected youth, they shake their heads. "Oh, they're not going to come up with any money. You can't ask for that." But I want to put it in some perspective as we start to recast this debate, which is what I think these groups will have to do. A single U.S. Navy nuclear aircraft carrier costs about $10 billion. One of them, not the fleet, one. How much impact do you think we could get to have on urban poverty, not only in New York, though I think we could use all $10 billion with no problem in New York and we'd still have problems. But what could we do if we started to reshift these materials? Let me digress. I think, as David knows, I've hung around politics and politicians, and my father was one. I've been in this world since I was 9 years old. I've served in city government for 8 years. I was among the last interns for Bobby Kennedy. And as an insider, nothing sets my teeth on edge more than pie-in-the-sky reforms and appropriations. I mean, one of the reasons I don't teach, and this is undergraduate, not here, is there's a misunderstanding of the political dynamic of what it takes to get major reform done, particularly for groups that we're talking about. 5 years ago, I think to suggest significant investment in New York City for this population would have been a cruel joke. But in my view, times have changed both for New York and the nation. We have seen even some initial steps, and I think Esther and Linda Gibbs have been in the forefront of that effort, where the mayor has now committed $150 million, a significant amount for the city alone, to start wrestling with some of these really deeply intractable problems of poverty. But of course, New York can't do this alone. And I think anyone who conceives of this problem being handled as a local or even a statewide effort is doomed to failure. It's deep, what we're dealing with now. I mentioned those statistics about LA and Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland because we now have a systemic problem and failures that have hurt these populations. But we've got some things on the line, and the question is, can we bring some pressure to bear in time? Next year, a new president will be elected, quite possibly a New York senator, and members of Congress will also be on the ballot. During the last municipal election, voters of color were in the majority for the first time in the city's history. And in 2009, the city's council is poised to become a minority majority for the first time in the city's history. Also, the city's congressional delegation has never been more powerful. I don't think Charlie would be too upset that he mentioned himself as one of a new world leader, and he wanted to be treated just like that. Congressman Rangel is chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. which is a world power. I laugh at it, but it is world power. Jose Serrano, leading the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Financial Services, terrorizes the banking industry if he wants. Nydia Velázquez at the helm of the House Small Business Committee, enormous power. And Carolyn Maloney leading the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Credit. In the Senate, Charles Schumer is the chair of the Joint Economic Committee of the Housing, Transportation, and Community Development Subcommittee. And Hillary Clinton chairs the Environmental Health Subcommittee. These New Yorkers are in a position to affect policies and develop far-reaching programs which will not just impact New Yorkers, but urban communities throughout the nation if they mobilize and work. It's been done before. Let me just give you some hope. Look at the 70-year history of government farm subsidies. In terms of actual numbers, we're probably just about equal. Between 1995 and 2003, your tax dollars spent more than $131 billion on federal farm subsidies. I'm not asking for that kind of expensive program. I'm asking a much more modest one. But I'm also asking, the reason the farm subsidies went through was political leverage. And now we have political leverage. More fool us if it's not used effectively. I think we have to recognize the latent power here and use that power, not just for New York City, but for the entire country. The presidential campaign is already in full swing. Where do the candidates stand on the issue of urban poverty and the effects of globalization? Simple question. Have they even given any thought to these issues? And if past presidential campaigns, at least to the ones now that all I can remember, are any guide, the answer is probably no. We must find a way to challenge every candidate to provide a plan for a path to decent jobs for those who face barriers to employment, whether they are graduates of deficient school systems, high school dropouts, or even those reentering the society from prison. In order to elicit candidates' views and possible plans for urban poverty, the CSS is co-sponsoring with Local 32BJ a year-long, nonpartisan series of conversations with presidential candidates titled Working Cities. In February, former North Carolina Senator John Edwards addressed the Working Cities Forum. One of his proposals is pretty serious. He says if elected, he would intend to create 1 million transitional jobs as a pathway out of poverty. Very simple. They are subsidized jobs, work on public works, work in private sector, work, it's been suggested before. No one has ever seriously funded it for a long, long time. But it's out there. Next week, the forum will host Senator Clinton. Because of the front-loaded primary system, we hope to have every major candidate who will accept. I don't know what Rudy's going to do, but we'll see. We did invite him. This is nonpartisan. We did invite him. We hope to have him in by Labor Day. I'm not doing this because I like presidential candidates. I've been around this. But I need a baseline understanding of where these guys are going to stand on this critical issues so that voters that are interested in urban issues, and that's not only people who are poor. I think there are young people in this university and across universities across the nation, people of goodwill who are concerned. I think they have to come forward and put a platform out that's serious and that can be examined and critiqued. I don't want them to float through with, we're fighting back just one issue. I think that's responsible politics, and that's what we as people who are both policymakers and watch policy have to demand, that what's in it for these populations who are being left further and further behind. We are entering a time when markets beyond our shores are challenging New York City's position in the global economy. Our competitive position is considerably weakened when many New Yorkers are not in a position to contribute the full extent of their intellectual and human capital to our city's affairs. For New York City to remain a truly global city, we must give everybody the opportunity to contribute. Our challenge is to construct a vision of a working city, a 21st city that discounts no one and creates pathways to economic opportunity if they're willing to work hard. At CSS, we think that should be part of the discipline we all look to, because I think it has reality. And let me come back to the price tag, because always the price means something. Perhaps it's time to see the first, quote, nuclear aircraft carrier equivalent, something like the SS David Dinkins, or the SS Charlie Wrangel, or the Jose Serrano, or the Nydia Velasquez. That $10 billion program could begin to transform cities and make America once again a nation that leads all other nations, rather than the laughingstock it's been turned into. Thank you. I was running away from questions. Yes, ma'am. You? Yeah. Oh, I don't know how we're working. We can hear you. It's a little group.
For Africa. And my question is something that we all have noticed but not quite clear about what is happening not only in New York but all over the country, and that is this major construction boom. And all of these stores are closing up on a block, and then suddenly these big banks are showing up on that same block. Many of the banks are international. As a matter of fact, BBC Radio had a big talk with the Harlem community at Sylvia's 2 weeks ago about this very thing. What is really happening to our city and our country? There is a transition that's being made all downtown by Wall Street, as you know, but it seems like it's all a secret. So could you clarify what is really happening to this city and this country?
Let me start with where I generally have to do it, again, narrow what I've seen. We did have an exchange, as Esther knows, with the city administration, with Congressman Rangel's help, on the new construction boom. And not Esther, but I remember coming into the mayor's office and saying, look, we have all these disconnected youth, all these youngsters, can't they share part of the uplift in construction jobs? There's a long history. Actually, I think my father was one of the first ever to sue the sheet metal workers way back when. We have a very discriminatory construction trade industry, which has not been particularly receptive to this kind of stuff. I didn't get anywhere, but I was privileged to sit in the congressman's office while he called Mayor Bloomberg to say that he was going to set up a press conference calling for no new construction until there was some certainty that some of these jobs would end up with these populations. And that led, I think, the mayor quite rightfully created the Construction Opportunities Commission. They began to look at segmenting some of the apprenticeship slots now for these populations. But then reality comes in. When you sit with the construction trades, they increasingly, with some exceptions, have an increasingly sophisticated work requirement. It requires, if you're an electrician, I can't do it, advanced math. If you're a carpenter, really good math, plumbers, the whole range, they're becoming increasingly sophisticated as a world. And the question became, as we set up some of the paradigms, we had to set up pre-apprenticeship programs. And that's one of the things that was worked out. And the pre-apprenticeship, Strive, many of you know, was the front end of that. Strive found, however, that as they started to recruit, there was an overwhelming sort of rush of people who wanted these jobs. There was excitement to participate. But then when they did the literacy and mathematical skills things, some could do it, but many, if not most, still had a long way to go in remediation because of basic skills lack. So it's not even simple when I get there. The other less funny thing, we started a construction engineering opportunities high school. I was never been so proud in my life. Great. They were going to actually start getting young people on career and technical. The last meeting I found out, however, that because of the enormous pressure from all sorts of communities, middle class, moderate, they're overwhelmed with applicants. And their hurdle rate of getting in makes it virtually impossible for somebody who has limited skills, who hasn't been prepared adequately at the elementary and junior high school level. So it's like a fight. You think you win a little victory, and there's another one, because we're dealing with such profound disinvestment over such a long period of time. This is all getting to the fact that we're going to have to do some kind of work to start to cope with some of these things and recognize that we're going to have serious programs for young people and in all different kinds of settings. There's some that are in high school where they can make it. They're already there. There's some who have dropped out or who are sitting in high school without having mastered basic things, and we're going to have to infuse more resources in. And others, like Edward suggested, are going to have to be in transitional jobs programs where they can get a wage, where they can get work experience, and they can also continue on to repair the educational damage they've been subjected to. So I don't have any easy answers here. It's very costly. I mean, I really imagined this was going to be a lot simpler, but now we're in real, I won't use the metaphor, we're in it now. And to get out of it, we're going to have to spend billions of dollars to bring this society back to some kind of even keel.
Hi, my name is Agnes Leffler. I'm a junior at Barnard College, and I'm here because you were talking about education and how it was the responsibility of the government to instill a better education system, thus leading people to be more prepared for jobs. And my mom is a teacher in Oakland, California, in one of the poorest sections of Oakland, and she's a very hardworking woman. She goes in there every day, and also do all of her colleagues. And she really tries to do the curriculum and do a good job, but she says that it's impossible to do it because the families are they're just so disjointed and in such crisis all the time. And she's really tired of hearing politicians say that it's the fault of the education system because the school itself is good enough. It's just that the families aren't ready. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not the education.
Yeah, I see it, and I guess my reaction is, of course, I look at dysfunction as equal opportunity. I have a very wealthy individual who is now President of the United States who shouldn't be there. I've been a lawyer at one of the largest firms in the city of New York with a good portion of my partners who are alcoholics. I can't condemn a whole population, the people I grew up among, and unify them as they're homogeneous. I've got the same kinds of disabilities in middle-class communities of drug addiction, of crime and criminality. And I'm not going to allow myself to believe, because that's not what my background was about, that every one of those children can't be helped. And that's, this becomes an issue. I've been in and around poor communities all my life. And I agree that I have kids who are predatory, who don't want to work, but that's not every poor Black and Latino child in the city of New York. If it's a third of them, I'd be surprised. And we've allowed the generalization about where these kids are and their families are to justify withdrawal of resources. When I went to third grade at PS 138, we had 10 substitute teachers in a year. We got no books. I go back to PS 138 now. It's still the lowest performing school in the city of New York. No, I can't tolerate it because then it says it's race. And I don't believe it because that's what they said about the Irish at the turn of the century, that they were incapable of education and there was questions of their humanity. To condemn the poor because of their condition and then withdraw resources doesn't allow us to have a serious discussion. Not aimed at you. I understand what your mother's saying. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a graduate student at the School of Social Work. So you mentioned a couple of supports for the young and the working poor, which I completely agree with. It seems to me that we also need supports or resources for the middle income in terms of retaining them in this city. I think you mentioned that. I'm wondering if the administration and or the city council recognize that as a problem, the fact that we could lose the middle class, and also what needs to be done to ensure that the city does retain
I think what you're saying is precisely right. I think drum major and a number of groups doing it. I don't do windows. My point is to focus on the poor. The difficulty I have, it's not a difficulty at all. I think the middle class actually are going to get some supports because they're considered politically viable and important. I think, I'm focusing sort of the end of my career on the issue of poverty because the political dysfunction and the lack of leadership that's going on here is so profound that I want to focus on that. But I do believe that what I'm hoping for is to start to move some of the working poor directly into the middle class. This notion of, workers forever, that was another generation's fight. I'm for seeing people getting into good paying jobs and then beginning to establish the wherewithal so they can take the reins of power for themselves and insist on moving towards a middle class life. I think that's where I came out of. I think that's where most working people you find, that's what they're seeking, so their kids can make it and do better than they did. So I do think the housing issue, we've done some work with Mitchell-Lama, which is now being eroded like crazy, the housing supports that have to go in. I think there's a whole range of things. Housing seems to be the central discussion when you're talking about middle class. Yes. Oh, she's my chief of staff asking a question. Former chief of staff.
Okay, so I'm Donna Fishman, and I have dual role here. I'm a graduate of this illustrious institution, and I did have come to work with David Jones for almost 20 years. So when you were describing...
Everything is 20 years now. She is only 10.
When you were talking about, actually, you were just describing the fact that we're at a point where you're thinking at what our economy professors talk about, guns versus fun. Okay, so we can either spend $10 billion on anti-aircraft piece of equipment, or we can spend $10 billion on helping increase the capacity of people who live in this country to have a better life for themselves. So how do we go about organizing to be able to really get that to make
and I don't think it's so difficult now. I think that every poll, essentially the shift in the Congress was not accidental. I mean, it was not, some of us don't like George Bush, but this was a direct guns or butter thing. And the reason I think it's possible, and it's not my pie in the sky problem, is because increasingly the other economic groups are being swept into the same damn problem. Whether it's the middle class coping with no housing subsidies, the fact that every paper I've read recently has talked about essentially colleges being priced out of sight for even middle class families, there's a growing understanding that this can't work. So I do think it won't be universal, but there's certain things that I think we can align, and we have to pick those very selectively and consciously. Healthcare, not so difficult. The concern about jobs going overseas and what that means. And if they are going overseas, and that's inevitable, what are the backstops? I mean, everyone has talked about this, Friedman on down, that to have globalization that everyone is supportive of, but not do something about it is the end. So, immigration? Oh, sure. That's it. Esther, tell me to stop. Thank you very much.